Welcome to the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast, where we have real conversations about all things homeschooling from a Canadian perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about the homeschool journey from start to finish and all the stops along the way. So grab your favorite drink and come join us on the couch. All right, so welcome back to another episode of the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast. Elena and I are excited today. We're going to take you through the homeschool journey. When I was writing my book, one of the things I was trying to figure out was how to kind of explain homeschooling. And I had this idea about the homeschool journey because everyone always talks about it. Like, you're just going to go on the journey and da-da-da. But then I had this like epiphany and I drew it all out and it was like, whoa, that's exactly what it is. So today we're going to talk about all the different stops along the journey and the path that it takes, I think. So both Elena and I have made it from the beginning to the end at some point, somehow. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about the different stages of the journey. So at the very beginning of the homeschool journey, when you're first starting out, we end up at the outfitter shop. So if you're not familiar with outfitter shops, basically if you're getting ready to go on a travel adventure or a big hike or something like that, before you get started, you do all the research about the place that you're going to, and you need to make sure you've got all the right gear, like, the right shoes to go hiking, or, the right backpack to provide you with the amount of things that you need to have on your journey. So the first stop as a homeschooler is that basic gear up shop. When you were first starting homeschooling, what were some of the things that you were researching or wanting to know or thinking that you needed?
I guess I basically went to people that I knew were already homeschooling and thought about asking them questions, and then the conversation just started from there. So I guess kind of using that as a resource. I remember going to my library too and looking to see if they had anything. I remember being really frustrated when all they had was a big, huge, thick book all about homeschooling, apparently. And it was like all these things that you're supposed to do with your child each year. And it went into great detail. And I was just like, never mind. In my mind, those kind of books are just like discouraging you before you even start. But I remember using friends as a resource that were already homeschooling, or people that I knew. I don't think I had many homeschooling friends, but more just like acquaintances at that point. And I remember a woman that I knew gave me a Learning House catalog. And that was kind of the first step in that direction that I was like, oh, okay, there's actually like a company that does this. And back when I started, there wasn't nearly as much as there is now. I'm sure there was a few other companies around that I know of, but it wasn't like it is now. There's way more now. So that's kind of where I started out, and then just kind of went from there and kind of came up with more ideas as I went.
I know, same thing. I think we talked about this in the last episode when we were chatting about how we got started. But for me, it was just like talking to my sister-in-laws who both homeschooled. And I actually knew Donna Ward. If you're not familiar with her, she runs Northwoods Press, which has Canadian curriculum specifically around social studies. But she was actually my youth pastor's wife when I was growing up as a teen. So I got to know her really well. We did lots of things with her and her family as we were growing as teenagers. So when I realized that I was homeschooling, I remember calling her and being, and she's like, calm down. It's not that hard. All you have to do is, like, if you're teaching them letters, you do b, b, ball. I'm like, yeah, well, okay, I know that. She goes, that's it. I'm like, oh, okay. But what kind of advice would you have for someone starting today? Like, where should they start? What do you think that people should do if they're getting ready to start homeschooling?
I definitely think that they need to seek out other people that are homeschooling, and not just like people that are newly homeschooling, but people that have been on the journey for a while. A lot of places you typically find those people through places like Facebook. I know some people don't really like Facebook, but I know some homeschool moms that have joined it just for that purpose. That was originally why I joined it. It seemed that everything was going on Facebook and I was not hearing about it. Right. A lot of homeschoolers still seem to use that for their groups. So if you look in your community, like, for example, say you were in Toronto, well, there's tons of groups that would have, Toronto homeschooling group or whatever in the name. We even have on the Canadian Homeschooler website, I think it's called Canadian support groups on Facebook, or Canadian homeschool support groups on Facebook. And you can go there and there's like a big, huge list of everywhere that we found across Canada. And if your group isn't on there, let us know. But yeah, if you're just starting out, you're probably not aware of what the groups are. Some communities have more than one, some communities don't. Yeah, I would definitely say that. I remember when I first moved to the community I live in now, I couldn't find anything like that. There wasn't anything set up. I think it's become bigger kind of in the last maybe 5 or even 10 years. But when I first came here, there wasn't anything. So I remember actually asking at the library and saying, hey, do you know of any other homeschoolers? And they're like, actually, we do. And I said, okay, can you give them my name and number? Because they can't obviously tell me who these people are. Anyway, it worked out. They were good friends for quite a few years till they moved. But yeah, I guess that would be my number one tip is try to find a local group and get connected, because that's where you're going to get a lot of help and support and ideas.
In the before times, which is what I call homeschooling before COVID, I used to tell people what you could do is go to the Y or go to community groups and see if there's any classes that are available. I've noticed that it's a little slower starting in the last couple of years, but see if there's any community groups that are running activities for homeschoolers. And if there are places that you can go for free and don't have to pay to hang out at, you can just kind of hover around until people show up. That's one thing that you can do. Sometimes libraries do offer programs as well for homeschoolers, so that can be a great way to get connected. I like that as well.
It depends on your community. Like if you live in a smaller community, there's unfortunately going to be less to offer. I know, for example, our local library did try having something, but it just was not well attended and they ended up stopping.
Getting connected is a really important first step when you're getting going with homeschooling. The other piece that everyone always panics about is the curriculum thing, because school uses a curriculum. There's got to be something to use to teach my kids. And so the next step in packing up your backpack is figuring out what the heck to put in it so you can teach your kids. And I'm sure we'll have an entire podcast about choosing homeschool curriculum at some point in the near future. But just a quick tip I advise is don't go jump onto Google and type in homeschool curriculum, because you're going to get millions of responses, be completely overwhelmed, and just want to cry in a corner somewhere. So and don't go onto a Facebook group when you find it and say, what homeschool curriculum is best? Because every single family is going to give you a different answer, because best is relative to your kids in this moment with their personal experiences. So
yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, so I will give better tips. I'm sure we've got stuff on the website that you can look at, and we'll talk more about it. But my first steps are just kind of taking some time to consider homeschooling and the different options that are available and how you want your homeschool to feel and to look, and to understand that what your concepts of schooling might be don't necessarily transfer into what homeschooling is actually like. So just don't jump into the homeschool curriculum research right away. I know it feels like that should be the first step, but honestly, it's probably about the third or fourth step. The first step is figuring out why you want to homeschool in the first place and making sure you have that in stone, because there's going to be days where you're like, why did I decide to do this? And you want to burn it all to the ground.
I haven't experienced anything like that ever.
Liar.
Yeah, sorry. I have lots of times.
Yes, and me too, because that's part of, when you're with your kids all the time, which is amazing, but it also, excuse me, it also can be really challenging because of personality conflicts, or kids don't really have the same excitement about something that you planned, or they're just having a bad day. All those things can cause conflicts and trouble. And having that why did I decide to homeschool? If you know, it makes it easier to pull back when you're having a bad day. So that's one. Number two would be connecting with people. And sometime after that is when I'd start thinking about curriculum and what choices we're going to have.
So one thing too, when you do start actually looking at curriculum, is realize that you shouldn't just buy everything all at once. And don't go and think, oh, that curriculum looks good, so let's buy all the things. Yeah, that's a big thing that a lot of people have done. And yeah, I'm guilty of it too, where I have bought too much and then it's oh, this is not going to work. So it's nice if you can connect with local homeschoolers, that you can actually look at their stuff, maybe even borrow something for a few days, or really get a really good look through. If you have somewhere you can go, a store that sells something nearby to you. There's few and far between, but perhaps you live near one of the stores that sells homeschool curriculum. Even I've done before, like where on YouTube or like on some websites, you can look inside. Some people like flip through curriculum on YouTube to get a better idea, but like don't go overboard at first buying all the different subjects and all the different things and all the parts, because it's really hard to know until you get going. And yeah, I would say just start very basic and go from there.
And the other thing is, I have seen in posts on Facebook before when people are getting started, they're like, I want to choose a curriculum and I want to use it for the next 6 years, because they want to get it on sale and they want to try and plan ahead. And I would really caution against that, because what works today might not work in 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So just focus on right now, and then focus on the next year when you get there. Like, don't invest a huge amount of stuff into the homeschool experience until you've got kind of a rhythm and routine and see what's actually working with your family. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've definitely I look back over all the years and think, oh yeah, if I had known what I know now, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. Pretty much every person that I know that has homeschooled has made some mistakes with buying stuff. Like, it's just the way it is. You can minimize that, but I don't think you can avoid it completely.
No, and get some good shelves so you can store all the things that look shiny when you bought them, so that you have them on recall when you need to. So no, I'm just kidding.
It's nice though too, if you can, like once you have decided on, oh, I think I want to try that. It's nice if you can look for it used, because then if it doesn't end up working for you, then you can sell it used for the same amount you paid or close to it at least. Versus if you buy it brand new, like typically you're only going to get like 40% at the most of what you paid. So yeah, something to consider too.
Yep. And we'll definitely have a whole day about curriculum, because I think that's a really important conversation. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, the one thing too, if you're looking for where to buy used curriculum, there's the Homeschool Swap and Chat that we have, and it's called Homeschool Swap and Chat Canada. It's on Facebook. And then also you probably have other groups. Sometimes big cities will have their own, I don't know, like say, maybe there's a Vancouver homeschooling materials or something. I don't know, but just as an idea. So bigger cities might have their own, or provincial ones. I know there's an Ontario homeschooling materials. I'm sure there's other ones. And once you get connected with local homeschoolers, it's another question you can ask them.
Yeah, and a lot, especially in the springtime, you'll find there's a lot of used book sales. So, and if there's any local conferences, sometimes they have entire book sale options as well. Some depends on the conference, but different places have different kind of options available, so you can go check things out. So
yeah, it depends where you live too. If you live more rural, then you're not going to find that. Like for me, it would not be worth my time to get to those things, but other people live closer to them. So yeah,
so those are options. Another thing I was going to mention is every single province in Canada that I know of, with the exception of probably the territories, there is usually a provincial organization that supports homeschooling. So like in Ontario, there's a couple, the Ontario Federation for Teaching Parents, and there's also the Ontario Christian Home Education Connection.
Yeah, OCHEC.
So they usually go by the little acronym for their name, but see what homeschool association is in your province. They often provide resources on their website which talk about how to get started specifically in your province, because knowing the laws is a really important first step too. I probably should have mentioned that first. But finding out what's required of you in your province, because different provinces have different regulations. So if, for example, here in Ontario, we not really have very many regulations, whereas if you live in Quebec, you have quite a few that you need to comply with in order to be able to stay a homeschooler. So I highly recommend that you find out what the laws are in your provincial area and your territory before you get started homeschooling, and you can check with the association. Some associations have memberships that you can purchase if you want to, which helps fund them to be able to do things like work with the government and have a board of directors and those kinds of things. But it's absolutely up to you how you want to be involved, or if you want to be involved. But those are just additional resources that might help you out when you're first getting started. All right, so the next stop on the homeschool journey is once you've got your backpack on and you're already out the door, if you are starting from the very beginning And if you're not, we'll just imagine that you're hopping on the helicopter and you'll join us at the stage that your child's at. But right now, we're imagining you're starting from the very beginning with your little kids, your preschoolers in the early years. And I call it the Preschool Meadow, which I kind of envision as being this big, wide open field, beautiful flowers, tall grass, maybe a tree here or there, lots of beautiful flowers and wandering around. And the thing about meadows is there's really no direct path that you have to take. You can kind of wander around, take your time, enjoy the sights, lie down, have a nap in the grass if you're brave enough to avoid ticks, those kinds of things. But so this is what I envision as Preschool Meadow. And if you're wondering what preschool kind of is range age-wise, I always consider it to be like 3 to 6 before they would be actually in a classroom doing schoolwork. That's the general preschool meadow. But I know that a lot of people, when they're starting to think about homeschooling, especially if they are starting from the beginning, often start thinking of homeschooling even younger than that. We've seen people in homeschool groups asking about homeschooling when their kids are like 1.5 and 2. So let's talk a little bit about the toddler / preschool meadow and kind of the things that we've saw or experienced or advice that we have for those years.
I would say keep it really simple. I don't think you need a curriculum. I know some people like that, but you definitely do not need it. I just kind of see it as an extension. I mean, when they're little, I've always been at home with them, and then it just kind of just continues. I don't know, doing things like helping me around the house with cooking or cleaning or laundry, going on walks, discussing what we're seeing, examining all the nature items, chatting about the birds we see, stopping and chatting with neighbors, checking the mail. And just, I find that age really curious. So they have a lot of questions. So even something simple like checking the mail at the post office where we get our mail. And it's like, well, where do they get it from? And how, put the letter in the mailbox. Well, how does it get to grandma's house? Like, things like that. Like, they're learning all the time. I mean, all kids are, but it seems more
intuitive.
Yeah. And it seems like little kids, you can almost see the learning happening all the time. It's just, I don't know how to really describe what I mean, but they're just constantly asking questions. And so I would say keep it simple. Lots of read aloud books, trips to the library. If you can find other people that are homeschooling that have little children, get together with them. Just those kind of things. Visit parks. If you have any places near you that are interesting to little kids, museums or beaches, little hiking trails. Maybe there's a zoo near where you live, or some kind of historic place that runs children's programs now and then. Or there's so many things you can do that are educational but fun. And that's kind of how we've always done those years. We haven't gotten into a big curriculum type thing. Now and then, especially if like little kids see their older siblings doing schoolwork, then they want something, but there's so much you could get really inexpensively or print off online, that little worksheets that they can, do and if they want to. But otherwise, I don't really stress over that age group as far as like formal sit down and do your work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't stress about that too much until they're older anyway, but it's just, I think, really important at that age to make sure that you're not, they're so eager to learn. And if you start making them sit there too much and do too much that they're not interested in, I think you almost take away their joy of learning all the things.
Yeah. Don't put pressure on the little ones. They don't need it because they're already absorbing everything already. I tend to have the five words for preschool: play, read, live, create, connect. Play is a massively important part of preschool years, because that's where kids be scientists and discover and learn all on their own, and learn how to work through things like communication skills, and learn how to do teamwork and how to handle feelings, like especially the big feelings when the blocks fall over and they're angry. And it helps them be able to experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. And there's no pressure involved with play. Play is just about exploring and having fun. And when it's guided play, it can be things that we are wanting them to reach a specific goal. So if we're doing a store, what are we wanting to teach them? We want to teach them the concepts of money, even if maybe they're not learning specific, this is a quarter, because that's not really what preschoolers are supposed to be learning, but they understand that there's some sort of transactional situation when they go to a store, right? Kids know that. They know mom has to swipe the debit card. But so that's let's play, read with littles. They love books. Just read books all the time, as many as they're willing to ask, even if it's requiring you to read the same book 472 times. Like, that's actually a really important skill for kids when it's annoying for us because we're exhausted of reading the same book. But once they understand the book and they can read it with quotations, then you can start to introduce the concepts of words, because then they can read, quote, along with the words when you point at them on the page. So they start making associations with words, visually seeing words with the sound words. So that's really important too. And it's a great way to do things like, oh, where's the red ball? And getting them to do lots of observation conversations with picture books and things like that. Plus, books just allow them to absorb as much information as they possibly can. So many little kids are like obsessed with looking at books of like animals and bodies. And I think your little guy loves birds, so he's got lots of birds.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So just having the opportunity to look through books and just absorb information that way is really helpful for kids too. And then life, as you said, chores, and just all the life experiences, making dinner, helping set the table, all these things are learning. Even if it's not a curriculum, it's still learning. It's a really important, and it helps their body. If you want to get all teacherese, you can totally do that. Doing laundry uses gross motors, which is our big muscle functions. And helping mom with the cutting things with a knife, that's fine motor skills, which is really important skills for our little guys as well. And then giving your kids lots of opportunities just to create, like crafts and coloring and art and messes and sensory play. And all those things are really important too, because they provide another element of learning on top of everything. And the last is connecting. That's kind of like getting out in the community. Think of all the places you can go with a preschooler. They just drag along with you everywhere. Doctor's office, library, the grocery store, the bank, the post office, like everywhere. The neighbor, like you don't really need to have a plan in place. You just kind of do life.
I wanted to say one thing though about the letting your kids be creative. I think it's really important to let them have time, even all the time, where they're in control instead of like those prescribed, like, do this and everybody's end result looks basically the same. So the type of creating where it's like, here's all the materials, go for it, and just let them be creative themselves, and just don't like get involved and say like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. Just let them be creative. I think it's really important for their brain and their development.
Yeah, then don't have to say the sky needs to be blue, because maybe the sky's not blue in their imagination.
Yeah, my kids sometimes have done the skies in different colors. I'm like, oh, like, what's that there? You just want them to talk a little bit more. And it's like, oh, that's a sunset, or that's a storm, or like, you just don't know what they're thinking. It's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to watch kid development that way. So, yeah, I totally agree. It's so tempting because the little kids crafts that you can find on Pinterest and watch people do on Instagram, they look so cute. And maybe there's a place for that within a bigger structure of things. But yeah, making sure there's opportunities for them to just create for themselves. If you don't really know how to do that, here's my advice. Get a big box. Every time the toilet paper runs out, throw the toilet paper roll into the box. Anytime you have a scrap piece of paper or a piece of paper that comes out of the printer with the wrong information on it, into the box. Anytime you have leftover wrapping paper, into the box. Get a couple of rolls of tape, in the box. String, in the box. Just, you don't have to go crazy and spend lots of money and buy every craft item known to man. Unless that's, your thing. You can go to the dollar store and load up a ton of stuff and have more things than your kid will ever know what to do with. But you can just get the stuff that's left over in your house. Kids are totally fine with recycled items. So just let them go and let them have fun. That's totally a great idea. All right. So once we finish preschool, we start entering the elementary forest. And again, another visualization for this is at the beginning of the elementary forest. When you start going through a forest on a hike. At first, when you get there, the trees are kind of a little bit spaced out. And eventually they start to get denser. So you have to kind of choose your path. Instead of wandering through the trees now, you kind of have to go through an intentional path where maybe other people have walked before or where there's a clear marking for what to do. It's harder to push through the trees when there's nobody been through there before. So that's often why people end up going on a specific set of path. So that's kind of what I envision when I see elementary forest. The early years, grade 1, 2, 3, you're kind of a little bit wider of a path. But by the time you get to 4, 5, and 6, things narrow down a little bit so that you kind of have a direction that you're going. So for me, this is elementary forest. I see the path through the trees. The sun's coming through. We're still enjoying everything. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But it's a little more intentional than the preschool years. So for me, I usually started homeschooling with intention probably when our kids are around 7. I'm not sure we did much school before that point, like official school, other than they absorb lots of information by having either older siblings or by just life learning, or if they want to do school, we buy those wipe off boards that with letters in them and they can just play. I never did it like intentional, like we need to sit down and do school. No, but when we get to about grade 1, grade 2, even at that point, I'm still pretty laissez-faire about everything. For better or for worse, that's what I've decided to do. I found that, and then as we start moving towards older grades, we were much more intentional with our plan. Like, okay, so now we really need to study some science and we need to do that. Is there anything that you found was really helpful for you as you started moving into the elementary school years?
I would say that I started being more intentional at about like the grade 1 level. So the kids were 6 by then, I guess. I think looking back. So when they were like, if they had been in school, they would have been in grade 1. That's when I would start being more intentional beyond the kind of daily life stuff I was talking about. I mean, by that point, they would pretty much know most of their letters, maybe not the tricky ones. They would know some of the letter sounds. They would know a lot of different numbers, like being able to count, maybe mix up here and there, especially in the counting in the like 13 to 19. I always found that more tricky, but in general, like they've got some basics down by then, right? Like their basic shapes and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I started being more intentional at the grade 1. And I mean, at that point, you're mainly focusing on, at least in my home, the early math skills and the early reading skills. I don't really see the point in teaching spelling until they've got some reading down. We're focusing on learning how to print letters properly. Maybe we even did that a little bit in the earlier years, like age 5, 4, if they're interested. It kind of just, the line's kind of blurry of when those things, it kind of depends on the child, what they see their older siblings doing, what they want to do, what their interest is. Like, I remember my little boy the other day is like, show me all the letters again. Like, it just kind of happens. Like, but yeah, so we're more intentional by that point. I think it's important to be aware of that some children pick up reading really easily. It almost seems with like no instruction, and some really struggle. So if you notice those early signs of really struggling, then it's important to have a program that really works well for children who struggle. I have had the full range in my family, from reading very, very young with basically no instruction other than me reading to them, and having a child with dyslexia. So I think it's just important to be aware of that when you're choosing reading curriculum. And if a reading curriculum isn't working for your child, then step back and be like, okay, this probably isn't working for a struggling reader, and I probably need something more intensive with phonics. Some reading programs are more like sight word based, or just move too quickly, or those kind of things.
And for me, I found that hands-on learning is really important, especially in these early years. So
Yeah.
anytime I have a program that, even if it's not designed to be hands-on, if there's a way to take the concepts and move it into a hands-on activity, taking the concepts and making them tactile. So touch and feel kind of activities. So if we're doing math, we might use things like chocolate chips or jelly beans, although they disappear and it's really good for subtraction and not so much for addition. But you can do things like blocks, or, if you're learning letters, you can do the magnetic letters on the fridge. If you're doing science, that's a great opportunity to do things like experiments, or the demonstrations that are available, that you can find resources for them just about anywhere, especially for the early years. Different things that you can do to make it interactive with your kid, because they love and absorb information by doing it. So if there's a way to make it a doing it activity, then I highly recommend that, especially in the grade 1, 2, and 3 years, before the quote pressure of starting like more intentional school drops in. Although I still like doing hands-on activities even when they're in high school. So
Oh yeah.
that's me. But so for me, I really like hands-on stuff.
Yeah, I think too, like adding, especially some kids seem to need this more than others, but adding a lot of movement to your day.
Mm,
So making sure they get some time outside. If that's like absolutely impossible, say it's like, extremely cold or something like that, then making sure they get some movement inside. Even something simple like, remember somebody telling me once, like, let them practice, say, their math facts by using the staircase. So I would have
yeah.
my child start at the bottom, I would be at the top, and I would be like, okay, what's, 2 + 4? And then they would give me the answer. And if they got it right, then they'd move up one step. And then I do the next one. Okay, what is 7 + 3? And then whatever facts you're working on. It can be spelling words, it could be any math facts. There's so many ways to use that, or just reciting math facts as you throw a ball back and forth, or maybe you have a mini trampoline to jump on or an outdoor one. You can do spelling using a cookie sheet with flour in it or practicing handwriting that way. And then when you're done writing in it, you kind of give it a little gentle shake and it kind of goes back to it kind of erases it, goes back to filled with flour again. Even something as simple as, okay, you do need to sit down and do these math questions. So do 3, then run 3 laps around the table, then come sit back down. Then do 3, then 3 laps around the table. I had one child that, I don't know, she must have done millions of laps. Because she
Yeah.
really, really needed it.
Yeah, we do that too. So if I notice that we're dealing with struggling, like, okay, I really don't want to do math anymore, or those kinds of like, well, attitudes, even if it's like we just started, so there's no reason you should be bored already. But taking those breaks is helpful. So, okay, stand up, run to the front door, touch the front door, do 5 jumping jacks, run all the way upstairs to your room and do 5 jumping jacks beside your bed, and then the back door, and then come back to me just can really help.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say something that might be controversial. Food is a great motivator. Especially in the early years. And I don't mean you have to like feed your kid full of sugary treats and snacks, but if they are easily motivated by food, then use it. So, okay, well, we'll get a snack as soon as we're done math or whatever. And here's your carrots, whatever it is that your kid will be willing to be happy to receive at the end. If you need to and you're having a hard day, why not? That's what I think is a good advice. So,
Yeah, we've even done snacks like during homeschooling. I don't know, like
yep.
and it doesn't like you said, like it doesn't need to be something, quote unquote unhealthy. I'll make a smoothie and then give the kids smoothie and they drink that while they do their work or whatever. Like it's not, I don't know, I found it helped. And
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, that's one big thing. If their attitudes are not so great, then
Maybe,
sometimes they're
maybe
hungry.
they're hangry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hangry.
the whole thing about second breakfast. Yeah, that's kind of true.
It really is. All right. So the other thing I was thinking about is time. How long does it take to actually do a school day in the elementary school years?
Huh.
And
I never really like timed it. And the thing is too, is that I find learning just becomes all day in the sense of not sit down and do this at the table all day, but it just becomes ingrained in life. Like it's kind of blurry. But I would say like for sit down work, oh, I don't know, maybe like half an hour or an hour tops in grade 1. But like I'm not really like I said, I never timed it. Like we'd have read aloud time and time where you work on your math, time where you work on your handwriting, time where you work on your phonics. But I think there's an important thing too that like some kids really struggle. And so you need to like have a timer, maybe not that they can see if that stresses them out, but like where you're watching the clock and you're like, okay, it's been 20 minutes. Hey, we're putting this away for today. Like even if you didn't finish the
mm,
lesson,
yeah,
because some kids like they're struggling so much, maybe it's going to take them an hour to do that lesson. And don't put them through that because that's just really stressful. Maybe they need to do it in chunks. With my one daughter, I took sticky notes and I would just be like, hey, we're going to work on this for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes is over, I'd put a sticky note where we ended. And then
yeah,
it wouldn't have been the end of the lesson, but it would be the end of what we were doing that day. And then I'd pick up where the sticky note was. I'd even sometimes write on the sticky note, like, struggled with this, so that then the next day I would remember, okay, we need to review that first.
I think it's easy, especially when we're using the comparison of a school, to think that school needs to be from 9 to 3. And it's important to understand that, especially in the early years, school should not take that long. And
Yeah,
it's
for
true
sure.
because it's true that a lot of our learning, especially when we fully understand how to run a homeschool day, and homeschool just becomes ingrained in like everything, anyways, as opposed to just thinking of it literally like this is school and this is not school, which is kind of how we're taught to think based on the school system. But it doesn't need to be a full day. Like, if your child is making progress, it doesn't matter the speed it's going at. The main takeaway of this is that don't expect that a school day will take 7 or 8 hours.
Oh, definitely
Take
not.
like the school system seems to, but if you think about the school system and you break it all down, the actual learning time that a kid has sitting at a desk doing work or listening to a teacher is significantly smaller than the 9 to 3, because there's so many other things in a school day that interrupt or that are required, or shifting to new classrooms or lunch break or recess or whatever, that the actual amount of work time isn't that length of time. So as a homeschooler,
Yeah.
we're not obligated to do that either. So just keep in mind, pay attention to your kid and be willing to accept that school may be done in 2 hours, because that's one of the benefits of homeschooling is you can focus and get it done, and then you can enjoy the rest of the day. And I think that's important to know, especially in the elementary years when we think that we have to give our kids, especially when we're new at homeschooling, we think we have to make sure we've completed everything in the math book for the day or whatever needs to happen. Like, you don't have to have really heavy, dense academic days every day all the time. And then after elementary years, we end up in middle school. And not everywhere has middle school, but if we think of middle school as being grades 6 to 8, maybe 9, like that general, like becoming a teenager era. So I consider these like the foothills. And I don't know if anybody's ever walked on a hill before, but one of the things I discovered when I was in Scotland, which this whole concept was kind of based around, is that sometimes the hills are filled with peat moss and you fall in up to your knees and it's really squishy and it feels like you're never going to get anywhere or get out of there. So sometimes it can be tricky to get through the middle school years because we're hitting that teenager independence kind of level of fun. But and when we transfer that over to the homeschooling world, one of the things that I think is important is not only thinking about them developing their autonomy as young adults, as they start to get into being their own teenagers and having their own ideas. Yay. But but also thinking about how we as parents can help them become independent in their learning as well. Did you find that the middle school was around the time when they started developing the ability to be a little bit more independent in their schoolwork?
Yeah, I think different kids kind of develop differently that way.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them sooner than others. Yeah, so for the middle school years, I did notice that some kids are more independent. I mean, some kids struggle with it more than others, especially if you have anything like going on with them, say mental health wise or ADHD or anything like that, learning disabilities, and there's going to be more of a struggle, anything developmental. But in general, yeah, by then they're more independent. You can kind of say, hey, do this, and then I'll come check on it. Gives you time to stay with other kids or doing household stuff. Yeah, some kids before that get more independent. I read somewhere once, like first you teach a child how to read, then you teach them how to understand what they're reading, and then they're doing like critical thinking about what they're reading from there. Like you're first learning to read and then you're reading to learn. And I think that was kind of a neat way of putting it. What do you think about the middle school years?
So middle school, I found it a little bit of a challenge because my boys, as you mentioned, have had some learning challenges, which has made it harder for me to transfer over independence because they just didn't do the work unless I sat there staring at them.
Yeah.
But some of the things that I did find helpful to work towards that independence kind of piece was providing them with a list of what they had to accomplish that day, and then checking up on them repeatedly, or
Oh
at
yeah, that's
least
true. We did that
showing.
too.
Yeah, and then whether that's a whiteboard or a paper checklist or a digital message or whatever, just giving them something to be accountable to, so that this is what you're expected to do today. And it's also important to include things like hygiene on that list, because
Showering.
yes, shower, it always goes on the list, because they just don't care. They're not, maybe this is just a generalization, but I'm 3 for 3 heading into 4, and generally they don't care. So it's important for us to help them be able to learn that skill as well.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
yeah, one of the things that I found hard in these years is they think they know everything. And so they're not necessarily willing to listen to me as a parent, as a teacher as well. So I found that in this point was when we kind of shifted from mom is the full teacher to finding resources where there's a teacher either on a video screen or another, or like a class kind of setting, or somebody else can be teacher if needed, like programs that allowed a teacher to teach the class and then we do the work together. So then it's
Yeah.
not just mom at me like, Charlie Brown. that was one thing I found was helpful for me moving to the middle
Yeah,
school
me
years.
too, for sure. Yeah, we've utilized things like that as well.
Because then it's not mom's annoying me, it's let's do school and mom's here to help me along. So that was one thing
Yeah.
that I found as
It
well.
also gives you time if you have other children that you can do things
Yeah,
with.
absolutely.
Well, that helps. Those years are really up and down with hormones. It can be earlier or later depending on the child, but they all go through it, and that can be difficult to deal with and navigate through. So I think giving some extra grace for those kind of years. I mean, I remember being in those years and how complicated it is, even though if you're homeschooling, your child's not at school, but there's still drama in homeschool groups or drama with neighborhood friends, or I don't
Siblings.
know. The girl stuff in those years can be pretty hard. I don't know if it's that way with boys, but it is for girls for sure. I've heard this from lots of moms. And yeah, so I think having some extra grace and, doing things like, hey, let's take a break and let's just snuggle on the couch and just let's go on a walk together, like talk it out, like whatever you need to do. But having that understanding that like it's really hard to transition from the childhood years to growing up. And I'm sure we can all remember that. Maybe we don't want to, but it's tough that way. So that does affect homeschooling those years for sure.
And one of the things I've learned from having just boys in particular, because my girl hasn't made it to teenage years yet, but the boys one is you parent them sideways, if that makes sense. So if you're having a rough time with a boy, sit beside them. So put them in a car with you where they don't have to make eye contact. They can just sit beside and they're more likely to have a chat. Or if you sit on the
Hmm.
couch beside them, you can have conversations with them. They'll be more open that way. So for me, that's some of the things I discovered in those years because they do the whole like, I'm not going to talk to you. You're the worst mom ever. But if you sit with them and just have a conversation in a way that's like respectful and adult with them, because it's really hard when they're not acting like adults but want to be treated like adults.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But just giving them talking to them from the side can give them some space. That's some of the things we've noticed from boys as
Hmm.
well. So
That's interesting. I'll have to keep that in mind. Yeah, Lisa and I kind of have opposite families. She had all boys first, I had all girls first, and then she had a girl and I had a boy.
so I know who to go to when my girl gets to the point that I'm going, what am I doing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can ask you about boys.
There you go. So, all right. And then after we get through the foothills, we end up at the mountain of high school. And in my analogy, it was kind of like, you know how when you're rock climbing, you let the person climb the wall and they've got a harness on and there's a person at the bottom with the belay holding onto the rope to make sure they don't fall. And I see that as high school. We're the one at the bottom just holding on to the rope, watching them. They can put their foot wherever they want on the mountain because you can take all kinds of paths to get to the top, right? Like there's not one direct path up the mountain. There's usually a lot of different places that you can grab and hold on to, different things you can study, different things you can try, different paths to the top. Like the top point might be different for person A than it is for person B because maybe this one's going to university and this one's planning to go to work or become a part of the trades or go to a college or whatever. But I see us as the parents at the bottom, like just watching them to make sure they don't stumble and they don't fall and that we can help guide their steps. We've shifted from being the teacher to a facilitator when we get to the high school years. That's kind
Yeah.
of what
And then
I
as the high
see.
school years go on, I think it's important too to sometimes, I don't know, I have a child who sometimes be like, well, what do you think? What would you do? And I'm like, no, this isn't my
Right.
role anymore. I can talk about what you're thinking, but I'm not just giving you the answer. This is
Mm-hmm.
something you have to talk it through with. Kind of like less and less of that, like facilitating and more, not that you're wrong. I mean that as they grow older, I find sometimes you have to let them fail, which is really hard to watch because I don't
Yeah.
want that for my child, but at the same time, they learn through that, right? Like, think of us as adults. How many times have we learned through mistakes?
True.
So, giving them more ability to decide on their own. I think some kids are better at this than others. Like, some kids are ready for that earlier and just ready to just be like very independent. I'm going to do this myself. And then other kids aren't quite wanting that yet. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it kind of happens at different stages for different people, even into the like early 20s sometimes from what I've heard from others.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think it's important to also let them make some mistakes and not like major mistakes that, I mean, I guess sometimes, but like, I don't mean something that they're going to be like in severe harm and you saw it coming. I mean, like little things, letting them be aware of situations, but now it's up to them to kind of make those decisions and figure
Well,
it out.
some of that could be things like, okay, maybe they said they really wanted to study a particular subject, like astronomy, but then halfway through the year they've stopped doing the work. Like as a parent with a high schooler, it's my responsibility to be able to provide them with the resources, but I can't force them to learn. So if they quote just stop or drop out of a program, what is the consequence of that? And
Yeah.
how can we fix that consequence, and or how can you fix that consequence, and being able to provide them with opportunities to fail without massive consequence that's going to impact the rest of their life is helpful. Yeah, I agree with that. That's
Yeah,
good
or
too.
like little things, like I can think of a situation with one child, they needed to call somebody, and it wasn't like calling a friend, it was calling a business, and they're like, "Oh, like can you do it for me? Because like I
Mm.
don't want to stumble over my words." And I'm like, "No, like I can talk to you ahead of time about what you might say, but I've stumbled over my words before. That's an okay thing. People do that when they're nervous. It's okay. You can do this, and they did it." So I don't know, it's hard to, like, when you have younger and older, I think that you're used to doing things for the younger child. And then it's like, whoa, switch gears. Now I got to say, no, I'm not doing that for you, to the old, because they have to learn. Like the high school years seem to be about letting them try things, letting them have different interests, um, letting them explore and do it all, like with healthy boundaries, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot more opportunity to kind of discover those things. And I think it's really important during those years to discover as much as they can and to try different things, because then it helps them discover more of who they are. I mean, the next step is going to be what are you doing after high school? And,
Yeah.
are you going to do workforce? Are you going to do trades? Are you going to do college? Are you going to do university? Like, what is it for you? And if they've kind of explored those things, say through part-time jobs or volunteering or different courses that they've done, then they got a better handle of who they are and what they like. So that's really
Yeah.
important during those years.
One of the biggest challenges I've seen for me with the high school years is motivating them to do anything. And maybe that's just my family, but I found it very challenging for my teenagers to be motivated to try new things or to do new things because they're content and happy at home. So one of the things I think for us as parents is just we want to see them launch and be successful, but we have to remember that every kid is going to do their own pace at their own time, even when they get to high school and when they get to the early adult years. And
Yeah,
so just removing some of the pressure while still applying enough pressure, that's kind of where we're at right now. And
that's a
that's
hard
another,
balance
it
for
really
sure.
isn't. It's a new skill as parents too, right? Because
Yeah.
I've got preschool in the bag, but I don't know how to train a young adult how to answer the phone, you know?
Yeah,
So
it's
those are
it's tricky
conversations.
to kind of navigate that where they're needing to make some of those choices, but they're maybe not quite ready or whatever. And I don't know, it's true. Every child is their own pace, and I think that's also affected by whatever else they've got going on in their life and whatever they're struggling with. And I just think that it's important just to recognize that and just help them as much as we can. But it's just,
It's just a different hard, right? That's what we always
yeah,
say. Not
yeah.
not
I find the like feeling of loss of control hard though. Like,
yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know,
that's
like, oh, like I don't always exactly know where they are, exactly know what they're doing, or like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I know, but I don't, like, I'm not there. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to go do this. Okay, what time do you expect to be home? Well, by this time. Like, okay, yes, we do that. But I just mean it's different than like little kids are always with you and exactly who their friends are and what they're saying. And, like, it's just,
Yeah.
and it seems to just be 1 second you're having this preschooler, and then I mean, it's really cliche to say, but it feels like you blink and you're like, oh, what, we're dealing with high school and post-secondary. And yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then of course we're at the summit where we're like, "Oh, we did it." Or and then we look back at the journey and it felt so long. But then it really was so fast, like you were saying. And I think of the summit as, okay, well, we've reached the top of this mountain. And we look out and there's so many other places we could go from here. With our kids, it's their opportunity to go forward and pick the next path that they're going to take. But we can look back and encourage the people who are on the path already. So as homeschoolers who've been there, done that, experienced it along the way, we can turn around and be like, yeah, you can keep going. Trust me, it's rough right now and you got your pants up to your knees in the mud, but it's going to be fine. You got it. You can do this. So, just for me, this summit is kind of like an opportunity for me. And to be the encourager that I wanted to have and that I did have on my homeschool journey. So that's where I'm at right now, although I'm kind of at the same time back at Elementary Forest. So we're all over the place in our place. But
Yeah.
being in two places at the same time on the homeschool journey, it's kind of nice because now I can look back at myself, which seems really, this is really going to be inception-y, but looking back from my wisdom and experience of having done it a couple of times already, like I have two that have finished high school, whether that's with perfection or not, I don't know at this point because I haven't seen the next step for them yet. But I'm able to look back at my younger kids and be like, oh, I've done this. I can do this. Like
Yeah.
I know what to expect now, and I know how to handle what's coming. Or I've got tools in my toolkit that I've picked up along the way that are going to help me be successful with you and enjoy this journey with you instead of feeling like we're just slogging along trying to get things done. I've got the experience now to be able to handle some of those challenges. I mean, homeschooling is going to be challenging. Even if I had a million kids, there's still going to be challenging periods for every single one because that's just
Yeah.
life, right? So,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
I do love being able to look back and see myself and encourage myself from my own experience as well.
Yeah, I think it happens with even just parenting, like homeschooling aside, like, you have your first baby and you're like, what am I doing? And then you have your second,
Mm.
they're a different child, they have different things going on, but you're like, okay, like I did this before, and then, if you have more or whatever, then it's just every time you have kids, if you have more than one, it's kind of, you can kind of encourage yourself like, oh yeah, I remember this. I find that every time the first one goes through something, it's like, how do I do this? But yeah, so I think homeschooling is like that too, that if you have more than one child, you can kind of look back on that. And if you don't, then you could ask a mom that's further along, like, hey, how did you find this? Like, is this something you experienced when your child was this age? And you're not always going to find somebody that has the same kind of understanding, but if you ask enough people, or you generally can find somebody that has similar struggles.
Yeah. So there we are. We've made it all the way through the homeschool journey, from the outfitter shop to Preschool Meadow to the elementary forest to the middle school hills to through the high school mountain and then up to the summit, and we made it. And if you're one of the people that get to the outfitter shop and you grabbed a helicopter and you joined in at some other point along the journey, just keep in mind that the minute you start is fine on the journey. It's not that you aren't okay because you didn't start at preschool. You can start at any point along the way. And if things get rough, you can absolutely helicopter back to the outfitter shop and find an alternative plan for your kids and their learning experiences. I am a big advocate for choosing the best plan for your child, no matter what that looks like. So for some families, they'll homeschool from the day one when their child is born all the way to when their kids are in university. And for other families, they may take a break and they may have to send their kid to school for a while, whether because life experiences or because they're having too many challenges at home, or it's just going to be the best thing for the relationship of their children. So remember that the homeschooling journey is just the big visual picture. And wherever you are on that journey, we want you to feel encouraged and supported. And hopefully we've been able to share that a little bit with you today. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the chance to walk along the homeschool journey with us. In our next episode, we are going to debunk some of the most popular myths about homeschooling. If you have any feedbacks, ideas for topics, or people that we should connect with for future episodes, please let us know. Thanks so much for joining in. Until next time, happy learning.